Sorry? Yeah. And bigger ones, but with silt. And they were contributing, basically, that was the fleet. The Greeks, because of cheap labor, could build these things with more or less 1/3 of the price that the French could build them in their own country. So the French and the British were not really pleased because they were at a competitive disadvantage. So they kind of badmouthed the Greeks at the time. And what happened is that the insurance premiums went up, meaning that the Greeks were again at a disadvantage. We survived up to that year. So in 1853, the Greek fleet was first, carrying more than 670,000 metric tons through the Straits of Bosphorus. You have the Crimean War, you have a lot of these crises at the time, but they were really first. Afterwards, with the cheap labor, there is a key there. The insurance premiums went up. There was no insurance for vessels within Greece. So we always relied on insurance from overseas. Now, after 1855, effectively, steam took over. Steamboats took over. And so the Greeks, because they didn't have a Greek state, they may have been, and things are far more complicated obviously than this, but it's interesting. In 1857, the Greek government, Mavrokordatos at the time, bought 3 steamboats from the British, one of which was at the beginning of the slide, I'll show you later, and started and tried to kickstart a steamboat company in Greece. Now that was the first great effort towards steamboat entrepreneurship, let's say, in Greece. That company went through a few things, bankrupted a couple of times, and then it was gone by 1903. However, this was a great first element of determination from the Greek state to do something about shipping, and realization that things need to be supported. During this period, and despite the fact that we did not really go well, certain things were done. The Greek state establishes connectivity to non-popular trade lanes. So it connects the islands that are not popular with the steamboat company. We had, I think, by 1870, around 12 trade lanes connecting basically the islands together. Syros becomes a center. The dry dock, Neorium, gains fame, and in 1876 wins the gold medal in the Global Exhibition of London. We're entrepreneurs. In design, they have even their own design called Syriacon, which unfortunately I don't have a picture of, but it must have been brilliant. They build steamships and tugboats, small ones, but they do. In the 1880s, Trikoupis tries to change things by trying to build infrastructure within Greece. He finds opposition of landowners, and this is a problem that we have until much later. Industrialization came much later in Greece, and we'll see in the next slide what happened. But this is one of the key issues. Know-how was missing, capital was missing, insurance was missing. And of course, we had a couple of bankruptcies in the way. In 1903, one, I think, key aspect is Moraitis starts the Greek-American trade lane. And in 1908, Birikos starts with Patris as well. So it connects Greece to America, and that means that migration starts occurring in many more numbers. So people can leave, like we left and came to Australia as well, send money back, and that started to change things within Greece. The other very sad fact was the 1922 catastrophe of Minor Asia, Smyrna. With migration from there, though, what happened? The culture change affected, assisted. So the know-how, there was know-how that came about. The overall attitude towards the industrialization changes slightly, and that contributes to the miracle, as we will see on the next slide. And remember, Onassis came from Smyrna originally via Argentina and the US and Monte Carlo and all these other places. But he was originally from there. So the main things to remember about this is the technological change that we couldn't bear, that we didn't really take advantage of. The fact that we didn't have capital within Greece to invest, or any kind of investment facilities, lack of insurance companies, and also lack of know-how. Now the second period, it's much more optimistic. As you can see, it's upward. So what this shows is the percentage of Greek-owned versus global fleet in deadweight, in cargo carrying capacity. And it ranges from 1929 to 2016. So this is far more impressive if we consider this. In 1930, the Greek fleet was 10th in the world. By 1970, it was first. Now have a look at the slide. In 1939, we are 3.6%, and in 1970, we're 13.6% of the global fleet. Now have a look at this slide. After World War II, the deadweight growth traded on ships grew by more than 100% in the 50s and the 60s. So the fact that we quadrupled more or less the percentage in global fleet is more or less, it became 16th growth because of these numbers. And we'll come back to this slide and explain why that happened. Now if we start from the 30s, very simple, and this is an attitude thing. Ship prices plummeted up to 67% because of the global financial crisis. So what did the Greeks do? They bought vessels. They bought heaps of vessels, bulk carriers especially. So they took a calculated risk, and this is something that you will see more and more and more. In 1931, we had the Russian dumping, wheat, and many other products, butter, lumber, and they took advantage of that. In 1932, the Panama Kickstart is founded as a flag of convenience, and that gives a competitive advantage to people that would take on that, like Onassis, who had probably all his fleets with Panama flag. At the time, the flags of convenience were only 1.2%. Then it just skyrockets. We'll get back to that. In 1934, Greeks expanded to Asian markets. Up to that time, 75% of trade was in North Atlantic. So there you start to really look at the beginning of globalization as trade around the globe in more even percentages. 1935, we have the Italian-Ethiopian War, where the Italian fleet is diverted to the war, and Greeks found space to expand further, taking over that space. In 1935, the Greek state becomes a bit more serious and founds the Ministry of Merchant Navy. Now, why is this important? Because there is a focus. Previously, it was part of the Royal Navy, as we call it here. They focus on things that they can do to really boost the merchant navy within Greece. In 1938, we start building the dry dock at Skaramaga, which still exists, and passed law for maritime accidents. So you see that there are things that have been done to really support the industry. In 1939, we finally established a shipping company that its founders are Greeks. So we get over one big hurdle. We didn't have a shipping company, we didn't have an insurance company that is founded by Greece, and we always were more or less blackmailed by foreign interest. Then the working. Greece contributed 10% to the Allied forces in the maritime. 600 vessels, 430 of which sank in the war. 20,000 seafarers, 2,000 of them died. By 1945, Greece had only 152 ships. The state was completely disorganized. Skill shortage and disputes galore, as we understand. And also, Greeks were shut out of international dry docks. So what happened after the war? Because there was devastation all around, the international dry docks supported ship owners and people that wanted to build vessels from their own countries. In Greece, we had started with Skaramaga, but not really. So the Greeks were caught without without vessels and without being able to actually do something about it. So what did they do? They bought heaps of those. So these are the Liberties. The Liberties were vessels that were built by the US government to carry cargo to the Allied forces in Europe. They built 2,700 of those. They can carry around 10,800 tons of cargo mass. So during the war, because of the vessels and the contribution, the Americans had already given around 15 of those to the Greek ship owners on a bareboat charter. They did not give us a gift. They gave us basically them as a bareboat charter, which means that we pay something, but we put the crew on and we put other things on as well, fuel, etc. Yes, you got the fuel.
No, sorry, correction.
Yeah.
We didn't get any.
Liberties.
No.
He built it. He built new vessels in the 50s.
No,
But, I'm not sure.
Liberties, I stand to be corrected, but it was Onassis' idea. He put the idea forward to the Greek ship owners, but unfortunately, for a lot of, because a lot of us Greeks like to compete and cut each other's throats, he did get one.
Please, let's leave discussion till the end.
Okay, let's
No. Let's leave discussion till the end. So the speaker won't finish.
That's right. I never said he was suggested. I'm not sure myself. Right? So it may be that he did something, but I'm not sure. But anyway, in 1947, 100 of those were bought by the Greeks at a fraction of the price. So the built-in price, we bought them basically 1/3 of the built-in price. Of course, they were second-hand. But that means that the Greek fleet was built on those. Overall, Greeks, within a few years after the war, bought 800 out of 1,100 that the Americans sold. Also, the Greeks invested heavily in tankers. This is one type of tanker, and again, T2 was the US government tanker that was built for the purpose of the war. 481 of those were built, and the Greeks had a fleet, bought a few of those as well. The Greeks had a fleet of 70 tankers by 1955, of course contributing new builds and everything else. As we saw before, the trade, let's go back to the slide, the trade grew exponentially. Now there's a couple of key reasons why this happened. After World War II, of course we had the Marshall Plan, which was a plan about the reconstruction of Europe, and that means that there was a lot of boost for material moving for that venture. This is one of the reasons. The other reason was the key decision for Germany and of course Japan to be reconstructed, and for Japan especially to gain independence of its fleet in 1952. And also the development of the shipbuilding and maritime Japanese industry. So that means that the Japanese started at the time and gained the influence, gained the independence to become the largest in ship currently. Okay, back to this slide. So the issues that we have during the first period were identified in the insurance, the capital, and also the know-how. The capital was still an issue until 1960. In 1960, Ethniki and Citibank were established with a maritime arm, investment arm, for which helped Greek ship owners to gain capital directly from inside Greece. This means that with banks being there, it is the start of what we call, and we'll see a bit later, of establishment of a maritime cluster. We'll see that how that evolved later. It is interesting to know that there was a huge investment in tankers, and there was foresight that petrol will become key in the development of the new world, and also a change in technology. If you recall, the change in technology back in the 1850s meant that the fleet and the Greek fleet effectively dwindled. We couldn't really get on top. With regards to this change of technology, it changed from steam ships to internal combustion engines, and this probably helped out from someone that didn't really have so much investment in steamships to actually support and grow in the new technology. So by 1970, 85% of global fleet operated with internal combustion engines. So there was a technological shift there as well. 1956, there is another key there. My own school at Senas Proprivo, which is the maritime college in Aspropyrgos, was founded. The Greek state starts building schools to gain skills. And this assists in the skill shortage issue that we had. By 1957, Niarchos, one of the shipping magnates at the time, is one of the biggest ship owners globally with 75 vessels. In 1958, he invests in Skaramaga, the dry dock, and Aristotelis Onassis at the time has around 65 vessels and gets involved with, tries to get involved with the Saudis. You'll correct him probably a bit later, but the main thing was involvement with Shell, BP, and getting contracts from the American companies that had much higher cost in vessels because of the US government, US flag. After this period, we'll see Greek ship owners to invest very heavily in Greek infrastructure and bring know-how back to Greece and funds back to Greece, and Greece started to prosper. Fuel carriage, and this is the big item, fuel carriage was 1-to-4 ratio back in the 30s. 1960 was the year that fuel as a commodity surpassed bulk commodity. So having such a big investment in tankers really helped to grow the fleet. By 1961-63 we have the Cuban crisis, and that means that we have low US imports. There was a crisis there, and from that period until 1968 we have a crisis in the charter rates, very low rates. So this prompted the Greeks to do what? Buy more. So prices were low, they bought more, and they held their own. And after 1968, where there was another boom in relation to petrol and prices, they actually took off from there. Yes, 1956, and that contributed to more vessels. But we can go on forever, I guess. I'm trying to get some key attributes from the era. In the 70s, one big thing that occurred, apart from discussing about the flag a bit later, was about the passenger vessels. For 70 years, we had the passenger vessels doing trans-Pacific and transatlantic routes, carrying migrants to and from, and passengers, of course. The aeroplane industry took off, jet aeroplanes took off in the 70s, which meant that these vessels were not needed anymore. So what the Greeks did, they turned them into cruisers. So by 1978, they governed the cruiser industry, having around 20% of these vessels. So really strong there. Okay, so this is the Greek flag. This is one of the topics that was mentioned before. So first of all, what do we mean by flag? What is a flag state? International law requires that every merchant ship is registered with a country. This country enables the vessel to carry its flag and also exercise regulatory control over the vessel. Also inspect it, certify the ship equipment and crew, and that's a key there. A ship operates under the laws of the flag state, and also the safety, pollution, environmental laws as well. So, having a flag like a US flag means, or a Greek flag for that matter, means that you have far higher expectations from the state. So usually a flag state, that's a closed registry as we call it, desires for the vessel to be owned or constructed sometimes within its own territory or national interest, and also be partially crewed by its citizens. Tonnage tax and taxes are also higher. So when you move into a Panama flag or a flag of convenience, as we call them, that means that you are enabled to have lower costs because of tax avoidance. Panama flag was more or less free in the tax. The ability to avoid national labor and environmental regulations, and the ability to hire crews from lower wage countries. I'm not saying that all ship owners that go into flags or continents do these things, but it enables them to have lower expectations of their vessels and crewing than if you go with a flag state that's close to its. So you can see there are three periods that I want to focus with the ones that have a circle. Between 1950 and 1955, you can see that the Greek flag on vessels dropped significantly. It's interesting, in 1948, despite the globalization and all this stuff that have been purported and the institutions that were put in place after 1945 to support this, in 1948, US declares law that does not permit to more than 50% of US-bound cargoes to be moved by anything other than US-flagged vessels. Europe and Japan did the same, reciprocated. So that means that Greek flag ship owners thought, I can't really carry any cargo with this flag, I have to go. That means that in 1952, 25% of Greek seafarers were unemployed. The seafarers at the time were approximately 40,000 in the 50s. At the same time, that was a really good serendipity point, the Greek state taxed 50% of profits to Greek ship owners. So they really had to go.
George, sorry.
Yeah.
So what flag did they go for between 1959 and 55?
A number of
US
flags.
flag or a European flag? Or?
US flag was one, and NASA's got in trouble because you had to be a US citizen to get US flag. You went to Panama and flags of convenience mainly. But also when you have Europeans, I don't know exactly the flags, but Europeans in Japan also did the same,
Right.
which means that they had to register with those to carry their cargo. So the global fleet is a fleet that doesn't have its own cargo to carry. It carries others' cargo.
Yes.
So they have to play with this. In 1953, there was the first effort from the state to bring them back. And you can see slowly that this tax concessions and this came back. In the 70s also there was legislation, again, in the Constitution, which is currently being debated in the European Union, which brought back vessels and ship owners with tax concessions, etc., to the Greek flag. And again, after 1985, it appears that things have since grossly deteriorated. This is a key legislation, and this is important because this is what created, effectively, the modern Greek maritime cluster imperialism. So this legislation was entered or reinforced into the Constitution of Greece and provided stability in taxation, foreign currency inflow to be specially treated, free up to a certain level, and consider subdivisions of these companies as foreign companies, meaning that you can pay equivalent tax, which was very, very low. Now we have this discussion about shipping and vessels, and this is what it really means. So when we're talking about the shipping industry, okay, the shipping industry has huge tax concessions, but the shipping industry is not alone. Greek seafarers at this in 2016, based on information from Greek statistics, are around 12,600. Effectively, very, very low in comparison to the 70s, where more than 100,000. Right? But the people that are involved in the shipping industry, different reports range this number between 160,000 to 200,000. The most reliant is around 192,000. So there is a huge gap between the people that are actually doing the work and the people that are actually working in the wider sector. And this is why. So you have the ship in the middle, and then you have ship finance, insurance, cargo, operations, risk, technical. Cargo is not so much around that. So we can have traders, merchants, charters within Greece, importers, maybe, but the others are important. And we'll see that in the next slide. This is why it's important. So on the right, you have the Greek flag that we saw before, but on the left, you can see some stats that denote how many of the ship management companies are based in Greece. So back in 1938, we had 96% of those based in Greece. Then 1958, it dropped, and this had to do with the legislation plus the fact that we still at that time didn't have capital investment in Greece. Ethniki and Citibank was established in 1960, so people were based in London, the US, Monte Carlo. And slowly, this grew, with the investment being established, insurance being ticked, know-how being in Greece. People wanted to be closer to the skills and knew that the infrastructure was there. So 1975, really growing. 1990, that's where you have the cluster starting in the 70s. And 1990 was 66%, and still 2009, the reports say that it's around 80%. Now, I don't know how much is now, because with all the instability and the changes of minds, especially in the political spectrum, people are uncertain and people are actually fleeing to other countries. But we still have 80%, and it shouldn't be too much lower today.
Sorry, what
Yeah.
does the shipping management mean? 80% of what?
Okay, shipping management means that 80% of the Greek-owned fleet that is managed, meaning you rent for the cruise, you rent for the fuel, provisions, and all the other things that we saw in the cluster, is being done from Greece as a base. So despite the fact that the flag may be Panama, the people that are managing the vessel are based in Greece, mainly Piraeus. Okay, if we can have a look, I know that we ran out of time. Hellenic shipping today. Now, this, on the left you can see the biggest ship owners, shipping companies in Greece today. Apologies, it's from a Greek newspaper. So it reads at the top the 40 greatest Greek ship ownership managers. And then you have Agelikoussis, which is Agelikoussis Group. It's a variety of companies, but it's basically one group with 137 vessels. That's the biggest. Arangel, which is part of this group, it was the first company, shipping company that was listed in the US New York Stock Exchange in 1987. The first three, Agelikoussis, the second one is Economou, Cardiff, and the third one is Navios of Ageliki Fragou, are specializing in bulk carriers and tankers, the first two, and Ageliki Fragou starts and has more of container vessels. In the Greek shipping industry currently employs around 12,600 seafarers associated with NAT, which is the insurance within Greece, Greek flag and/or other flag, but affiliated with that. To give you an example, back in the 70s we had up to 110,000, so this has significantly dropped. There are different statistics, as it has been mentioned before, but based on the Boston Consulting Group, NLStat, which they tally, Greek shipping currently contributes to the Greek economy. It's the second biggest contributor after tourism, contributes anything between 6 and 7.5% of Greece's GDP. Now, the interesting thing is that there is a crisis, and it doesn't appear that the Greeks are going towards employment at sea as captains or guys or anything like that. I'd like to give you a glimpse of what the future may be, and why I am a bit positive about the future. This is a short video, it's 1 minute and 30 seconds, of technology that is developed now from Rolls-Royce, which has to do with unmanned navigation. Now, this is not science fiction, this is happening today. The European Union contributed around $3.5 million to a project in 2015 towards these technologies, and it is perceived from really reliable sources that within 10 years, Rolls-Royce wants this out by 2020. By 2025, it is perceived that this kind of ships and technology will be employed in the Baltic, which is an easier sea to navigate and control, and slowly may kind of expand to other parts of the world. So I'll show you this short video. I think it's worth it.
What about pirates?
Sorry? Who are they going to threaten? There is no vessel. Yeah. Anyway, I think this is interesting because this gives a huge opportunity, and this denotes that we are basically in the midst of another technological shift. So we moved from sailboats to steam engine, didn't go that well. We took advantage of the movement into internal combustion engines and the tankers, petrol becoming key to the world and globalization. And now this is probably going to be the next one. So it is a huge step forward, and we'll see whether we're actually up for it. Now, if you want to know more and know that the time is still limited, you can go on my blog. I've given a talk about the future of shipping, and you can find stuff there. You basically look for this title. And in closing, I would like to say that we live in times of change. As you saw, we are entering a major technological shift. During the past 200 years, we failed to embrace steam versus sails, and this had devastating effects. We then managed to embrace the tanker demand and internal combustion engine and thrived in adversity. We are used to this. The recent crisis has found the Greek ship owners stronger. And as Aristotle Onassis said, it must free us also of the hope that the sea will ever rest. We must learn to sail in high winds. I personally believe that only then we may be able to reconstruct Greece from the ruins the country is in. Thank you.
Thank you, George. The mic is working. For quite an informative lecture, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions. But let me just start off the question time. When is a ship a ship? I mean, when do we include it as a ship? Does that have to be a particular size, a particular weight? Because otherwise you could be counting in.
With regards to that, that goes back to the stats as well. So the current stats of what we count as a vessel in this environment is anything more than 1,000 GT, 1,000 times 2.83 cubic meters. Previous to 1995, they counted this kind of stats in anything more than 100. And this is probably why you see different statistics. Now, how small is small? I can't answer that right now, but if you look at the actual definitions, more than 1,000 is what makes a vessel a vessel.
George, thanks very much for that talk. We don't have to keep on going back 2,000 years to say how good we were. I might have missed it because I was busy looking up whether Onassis did actually buy any of those ships or it didn't.
It is controversial, yes.
And the question was, the answer was 2070 bought, but in the scholarly article they don't say he bought anything, so I don't know. The jury's out. I'd like to know, did I miss, where are these made?
Where are the vessels made?
Where are the vessels made? And
Korea and China. That's basically it.
That's it, is it?
Japanese, Spanish, North America had a tremendous amount of vessels being built, especially the Japanese. But currently, the majority of vessels is built in Korea and in China.
Εγώ θα έλεγα, ήθελα να ρωτήσω τώρα οι επισκευές των κρατών των δυτικών, από ό,τι ξέρω γίνονται στον Τόπολη, στην Αλβανία και αλλιώς λίγα στον Βόλο. Αυτά φύγαν όλα από την Ελλάδα στο Καραμανγά και ήρθαν παλιά και κάναν τις επισκευές.
The question is whether there is anything happening currently in Greece and Skaramangas especially. I'm not sure whether there is any activity currently happening at Skaramangas. There is obviously a tremendous amount of unrest with regards to the ownership of a variety of assets in Greece. When we're talking about the fleet, yes, some of them may be in Dubrovnik, some of them be in Albania or Volos, or even Syros, very, very limited sailboats maybe. However, when we talk about these kind of vessels that were discussed, these facilities do not have the space and the quantum. However, COSCO currently has indicated that they will bring a dry dock facility of 300,000 deadweight, which will cater for a lot of these mega vessels. Yes, and they were built.
Thanks, George. I'd be interested in what you would think. I know the reasons why it happened since the global financial crisis, but the shipping market
industry now is in very much doldrums.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you two questions. One, are the Greeks buying? And number two, do you see a recovery and when?
Okay. I can talk to you because I'm an expert in containers. So I'll speak about containers, but I know about the other sectors. It's true that all sectors are currently dwindling. All sectors, the charter markets are completely low. I'll give you an example from the container market, right? When we have a container ship that can carry around 4,000 containers, that back in 2007 costed around $30,000 a day. Then it dropped to around 4. Picked up after 2-3 years in 25, and now they're around the 5. That means that these vessels are operating below the operating basically expenditure, their OPEX. The answer is yes, the Greeks are buying, right? The Germans, in the container industry, what happens is that the Germans have a very big stake there. The Greeks have increased their stake from 8% to 12%. In Germany, the biggest bank that contributed in the maritime investment, as a maritime investment, was Commerzbank, the second biggest with $700 billion. I have to get the numbers right? And they went into a fire sale of all their assets because everything was in the red. There's a very interesting thing what happened with subprime prices and then what happened with globalization, and that the biggest mistake in the container market is that vessels are being built. You have vessels that are being built currently. The biggest one can carry 21,600 containers. Now, the majority of the bigger builds are 18,000 containers. That putting all the containers that this vessel can carry on a straight line from here until Castlemaine. One vessel. We'll never see this in Melbourne because it cannot come in Melbourne. But currently the prices are low. If this changes, supply-demand in the container market currently is expected to recover or rebalance probably after 2020. So we don't expect the charter prices to change the price of a vessel per day until probably that time. It is interesting that for the last 3 years, the global trade in containers was growing between 1 and 3%, and container ships were built between 5 and 8%. So it's clear that it's actually changing.
Is a lot being built at the moment?
They have stopped. What happens is that you order for a new build and you get it 2 years later, right? Currently, the price of the dry docks have dropped significantly. There are no real new orders. People start to think that they cannot really afford it anymore.
George, congratulations once again on an excellent presentation, and also congratulations to the Greek community for a long overdue seminar on this topic. What I'd like to ask, more what your personal opinion is, how do you see the involvement and the investment of COSCO, the Chinese government, in the port of Piraeus, and given your background and expertise in logistics and containers, how do you see that force going into the future, and how will it benefit Greece?
I don't know the inside of what they've actually agreed. I don't think anyone does. However, some facts. A few years ago, I think 2008, Piraeus was carrying around 800,000 TEU. When we say TEU, we mean a 20-foot container, a 6-meter container. This is the unit of measurement for everything containers, right? So we don't need containers. Currently, it's reported that Piraeus is 3.3 million TEU, so it has actually quadrupled. That's a fact. Other than that, they've said that they'll come forward and they'll invest, some say 330 million euro, some say 500 million euro. They bring a big dry dock, they say, of 300,000 deadweight. It is happening. Where I see is that we won't really make money from COSCO. COSCO will not really contribute much from an taxation perspective, like the Germans did not really contribute anything out of the airport that they got, that haven't paid the FPA or GST for the last 20 years a year. However, we should get benefits from the halo effect. So, ships in the middle and everybody else working around it, everybody else mostly pay tax. With COSCO, the vision is to create more or less, I wouldn't say that, Greece to be the entry to Europe, and having feeders coming from Piraeus and having all of this. They've invested in that, which is great. Also, COSCO, China Shipping, is one of the biggest shipping companies in the world. They own a tremendous amount of assets, and also they own more than 1,100 vessels. Okay. China now, I'm not sure if you've heard of the Silk Road or One Belt One Road initiative, whereas they're creating a maritime belt, more or less, coming from China to Europe, and also they're doing what the Germans did with Europe, meaning that they're creating infrastructure. They will build infrastructure and they're buying key ports in the area. They just bought a port in Turkey as well, to go from China to Europe inland. So what the Germans did with Europe is very, very simple. They lent money to people coming to the European Union, and then they got their own companies to build the infrastructure, and the loan was there. So the Chinese would do exactly the same, because the global trade, and they don't want to still focus on low manufacturing, low skill labor. They outsource that, and they want to increase the amount of middle and high products that they deliver, plus to change the big gap they have between the inland and the coastal in relation to standard of living and money people get. So they are going to build Kazakhstan and all these countries between Asia and Europe, the infrastructure, increase the standard of living, but also find things for the people to do. Okay, that's.
It also the trains that we have.
Sorry?
They do the trains as well to take the goods into Central Europe.
They do. They have Trans-Siberian.
A question from the back.
Yes. Sorry.
I was just wondering what effect the Greek debt crisis has had on the industry, given that a lot of the discourse in Greece is focused on ship owners as oligarchs and tax evaders. Just wondering whether the political climate and the regulatory climate, especially with Syriza being in power, what effect that's having on the industry, and also a second question, whether the privatisation of part of the Piraeus port, which I heard something about, has had an effect.
There is a lot of discussions around those. About Piraeus, again, I'm not an expert in that, and there's a lot of intricacies around that subject. Overall, I don't know if the port was really efficiently run. I don't have data on that. All I can see is that the numbers are increasing, and there is hope to have more infrastructure built and more investment. Greece has tourism and shipping. So we need to be able to take those comparative advantages and run with them and do something with them. At this point, we're probably not really getting the biggest advantage from what we have. In relation to the crisis, there's a lot of examples. In Greece, the shipping industry has effectively created a lot of foundations, a lot of things that have helped out. You may have heard the Niakos Foundation, the Onassis Cardiology, and also the Eugenides Library, which is one of my favorites, and Will and Ree Museums. So they're all shipping. So they're contributing to the plight of the Greek people, and they're doing that by a number of ways. During this crisis, the European Union, part of everything else, has come forward and challenged the 1974 legislation. Now, it is interesting, and this is from an article from an Australian expert, but basically saying that for the Greek companies, there is the solidarity tax. There was, back in 2012, another 420 million euro over a 4-year period that they contribute. They voluntarily appear to have tripled the tonnage tax that they're offering to the state. It is interesting because with the Greek ship owners, especially the ones that are in Greece, and the ship managers as well, because they also have some tax concessions, the European Union goes against those. Although in 1981, when we entered the European Union as Greeks, they knew about this, And also, there is a very good argument from Veniamis, who is the head of the Greek ship owners in Greece, where he said, if we have it so good, why don't people come and get their vessels registered here? So the Germans, what they did, they actually registered back in the 80s and 90s, and still with Cyprus, and creates a tax haven in Cyprus. It's not really that far away. But at this point, I feel, and the news I have is that shipping companies are slowly moving away, and there is a huge unrest there. There is a lot of cost moving away. That's why it was very important that we had this maritime cluster started and established. Having 80% of ship management companies in 2009 in Greece is a tremendous benefit, because the cost of moving one of these companies abroad is very, very big. So we do have a lot of benefits there, but we have to play our cards right.
So the constitutional provisions you were talking about haven't been changed, or they have been changed?
Have not been changed.
But they're doing things around the edges, so the government's...
Correct. This was a voluntary tax measure that the Greek ship owners offered, and also the solidarity tax increased this contribution even more. Also, all the other charity work is completely separate from everything that the tax is.
Thank you very much for your presentation. What was the involvement of Sir Basil Zakharov in the purchase of the American Liberties?
I am not sure. I am not sure.
You haven't heard of him?
I have heard of him, but I'm not 100% sure, so I don't want to comment. Maybe we can take it offline.
One final
Is did you say they voluntarily gave tax?
Yes, they had a deal with the government. I'll read it because that's very, very interesting. Greek ship owners voluntarily paid triple measures of tonnage tax throughout 2017. That was in 2013 for 4 years, and this brings a further 420 million euro to the Greek government. Also, they had a solidarity tax levied on Greek companies since the outbreak of the crisis, and that resulted in a more than 8-fold increase in government tax revenues from shipping. That's from UGS, which is honestly not Greek.
The question is, the tax system in Greece compared to the other countries, is it percentage-wise very low compared to the others?
For these companies, what is being supported, I'm not a tax expert, what is being supported from most of the articles that I see, from international sources as well, is that Greece is probably on the higher end of taxation. So obviously the other countries are not fools to just overtax their own shipping companies. They provide certain measures as well. So with the Germans, the German fleet, especially back in the 80s and 90s, there was a huge outflux to Cypriot flag, and that probably taught them a lesson. But there is always rebalancing.
Okay, I think we might bring our proceedings to a close. George, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Apologies, Mike. This is a small gift from the community. We hope to see you all next week as well.
Nick, can I just interrupt you quickly? Next week is an important lecture. Our own Nick Dallas Nick Dallas will be offering his expertise on the area of cotton production in Ottoman Egypt and the role of Greek entrepreneurs. I encourage you all to attend. Nick is the heart and soul of these seminar series, so I think next week we're going to buy extra chairs because I'm sure we're going to have it's not so sign of appreciation. Thank you very much, George, and we hope to see you next week when Nick Dallas does his most interesting lecture. Next week, Thursday,